As we already said, happy Grandparents' Day, and have to do a little switcheroo here since we want to make sure you can see the kids for the bell time, so had to make an adjustment over here. You know, many of us grew up knowing our grandparents, right? Many of us grew up knowing our grandparents. Some of us didn't. I mean, I know some people, you'd say, you know what, by the time I came around, the time I was born, my grandparents had either passed on or when I was very young, they passed on. So some of us have that experience where you're like, you know, I didn't have that. But many of us have, you know, the experience that says, not only did I have one set of grandparents, maybe you had two sets. That's where I grew up. I had two sets of grandparents. I grew up in Florida, and so my grandparents that stayed there year-round were known as Grandma and Grandpa. And my grandparents who lived in Syracuse, New York, during the summer and came to Florida in the winter, they were known as Grandma and Grandpa Sunshine. But I remember going to my grandparents' house. I would go to my Grandma and Grandpa Hines, that was the ones that lived in Florida, and I remember going over to their house, spending the night, and I go to their house and play with toy airplanes. I remember my grandmother had a number of those golden books. You guys remember those? Yeah, I loved to get the golden books out. One of my favorites is Davy Crockett. I don't know why, but it was. I played dominoes and tractors at Grandma's house. And one of the things I remember at Grandma's house is that she had World Book encyclopedias. I don't even know if you can still get those or not, but back in the day, I mean, it was really cool if you had a set of encyclopedias. And so I'd go to there just to learn something in the encyclopedias. I was a nerd. It's okay. I've embraced it. My grandparents, they'd come to programs. Sometimes they'd be at my band concert or a choir concert or one of my other programs. We went to church together. We'd travel. Sometimes we'd actually travel to church together. We lived about 30 miles away from where we went to church, or 30 minutes away from where we went to church. And so sometimes we'd all go together. So we all pile into Grandpa's van. It's that 15-passenger van that sat like 23. You know what I'm talking about. And, you know, that's just one of those things. You just enjoy being with your grandparents. My grandfather taught me woodworking skills, and I remember being out in the shop with my dad and my grandfather, and we'd do special projects together. But there are moments that, when we think about our grandparents, there are going to be moments that we will never forget. There are going to be those moments where we say, you know what, I remember that time when. And it may seem insignificant to others, but for each one of us that have that special memory, that special moment in time, it's something that's very fun and something that we connect with. They pass on traditions. I know for me, many of the traditions that we have as a family come because of my grandparents. One of the traditions that was very fond on my grandparents that lived in Florida is that on Christmas Eve, we would all pile into my grandfather's van and we'd go look at Christmas lights. All of us, cousins, aunts, and uncles, everybody. We'd all pile into the van and go look at Christmas lights. We're talking for hours. Now, granted, there were a few places that you could watch like a lot of Christmas lights and go through the little Christmas village with all the lights and stuff. But that was something that was very special. We looked forward to that. You look forward to going to Grandma's house at Thanksgiving because even in Florida, even though it's Florida, every once in a while it would get a little bit chilly. You know, like 50. And it was enough for my grandparents to think, hey, we need to turn on or fire up the fireplace. And you'd walk into Grandma and Grandpa's house at Thanksgiving and you'd smell the wood burning. Something special about that, isn't there? I still think about that smell, and anytime I smell a fireplace, I always think of my grandparents. No matter where I'm at, because it reminds me of that moment in time. But they pass on things to you. My grandmother, man, she was a prayer warrior. I still remember her. I'd spend the night at their house from time to time, and I remember getting up on a Saturday morning, and I would see Grandma knelt at the sofa, the couch, praying. I wish I could be like my grandmother and pray like she did. I wish I could do it like Grandma did. I struggle to be like Grandma in that arena. Not that I don't pray, but Grandma would pray in a way that she was trying to move heaven and earth. The impact of grandmas and grandpas in history is beyond qualification. Most of the famous people of the Bible, from Adam and Eve forward, were grandparents. Often the grandparents play a very crucial role in the development of the grandchildren. Hezekiah was one of the best kings of God's people, but his father was Ahaz. And if you know anything about Jewish history, Ahaz was one of the worst kings ever, and Hezekiah was one of the better kings. But it's because he connected with his grandfather and followed in his grandfather's footsteps rather than his own father. And he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. And what was the result? There was a victory for God. I want you to know that grandparents, you can make a difference. Grandparents, you can make a difference. You do make a difference. And if you're saying, Pastor, I'm not a grandparent today, let me just say this to you. You are a grandparent in training. It starts now. The choices you start making now, we determine how you might be as a grandparent later on. You know, if I could be a grandparent, it'd be great because I wouldn't do some of the stupid things that I do as a parent. I look at grandparents. Let me just be honest with you. I see many of you grandparents, and there's things that you guys do that you would never have done with your own children. Right? I mean, we go to Mama and Papa's house. They're here today. And I don't think you had all the junk food that we have when we go to their house, like the chips and the hostess cupcakes and the donuts and all the good stuff that we have at Grandma's house. We wouldn't have had that. I mean, I remember growing up. I mean, you go to Grandma's house. I mean, my parents would give me an apple and say, "Here's your snack." You go to Grandma's house, you get cookies. Right? But grandparents, you do make a difference, and you never know when your role or your journey towards grandparenthood is going to start. And our story today is a unique one. It's found in the book of Ruth. It's a story of Naomi, who was a mother-in-law, and her daughter-in-law, Ruth, and how this story plays out. So we're going to look at just the back end of this scripture in Ruth chapter 4. Verses 13 to 17. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And I'll explain this to you in just a minute, but I want to get the scripture first. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. Then he went to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life," and if you're going to underline a word, you can underline that word renew. "He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Then Naomi took the child, laid him in her lap, and cared for him. I want you to think about that image there for a moment. Grandbaby's born. Mama says, "Look, here's a grandson." And there's a uniqueness here because it's not just about having a grandson, but it's a way to preserve the name of the family. And she takes the baby. Can you think about this image? Grandmothers, you understand this much better than grandfathers because sometimes, well, when I first picked up a baby, I wasn't sure how to hold a baby. But mothers, grandmothers, you just know how to do that, don't you? There's a special bond that you have from the very beginning. Woo! Even if they're spitting up on you, you just love them. And the women living there said, "Naomi has a son." And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now, the important issue here is that Obed has a son named Jesse. Jesse has a son named David. And if you don't know the whole story, maybe you're new to this thing, David becomes the greatest king in all of Israel's history. In fact, David is really the model or the rubric in which here's how you're going to live. This is the standard. He's the gold standard of all kings. So it's important. Naomi has a grandson named Obed, who really is kind of in some ways son, who then has Jesse and then has David. So what's some of the big things here today? I'm going to give you just two points. I know we got the kids here today, so I'll try to keep it a little shorter than normal because I'm trying to keep you engaged here. But we all have roots. Let's be honest. We all have roots. We all come from somewhere. In our story today, we have a unique situation. Naomi is married to her husband Eli. We'll just call him Eli because it's a lot easier to say. And she has two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. So Naomi has a husband, and they have two sons. Husband dies, two sons marry. They have wives named Orpah and Ruth. Pretty crazy names, Orpah and Ruth, right? Not to be confused with the word Oprah, okay? It's Orpah. Her husband dies, her two sons die, and so she's got widow daughter-in-laws. Ruth feels some unique connection with Naomi. Orpah decides to go back when Naomi says, "Hey, go back with your parents, go back where you came from, and go back to your gods." And Orpah goes back to her family. But Ruth, she has this unique connection with her mother-in-law, Naomi, and really just loves her as her own mother. Really has this unique connection with her and says, "You know what, I'll go with you." And after trying to convince her, she finally realizes that Ruth isn't going to take no for an answer. So she says, "Fine, come back with me and we'll go back to where I came from." And so they move back to Bethlehem. That's where she's from, little town of Bethlehem. It's 5 miles south of Jerusalem, what will be the capital city of Israel. And that's where the story begins to change. It's through the story of Ruth and this one named Boaz, family member, who decides to take them in, who starts to make sure that they're cared for, starts to find ways to connect with them. And he says, "You know what? I want what's best for you guys." He begins to give them extra grain and making sure that they're not without. Comes to the place where he realizes that he's kind of has a thing for Ruth, but in order to have Ruth as his wife, he has to take the whole lot, which is mother-in-law as well. So he takes them in as his own. He essentially buys them, if you will. And we don't understand that in our culture, but it was a way to redeem them in a way that was honorable. Let me just tell you, buying them in this case is not a bad thing. It's a matter of placing honor on the family. And so he takes them in. And so Naomi is now, his mother-in-law, if you will. Even though there's no real connection, except that Ruth's first husband, that was her mother. So when they have this baby, it seems like, well, she's really not the grandma. Technically, no. But she is, because she says, "You know what? I was married to your son, and he passed away, and we couldn't help that. But this one named Boaz, he's come to our aid, and he's taken us in. And he's here to be the redeemer, the one to redeem our name." And there's a great love story that ensues. Sometimes we can't always change our roots. Naomi really, she felt like she'd just gotten a bad deal. She was like, "Why is this happening to me? Why is this, why is my husband and my sons died? Why is this happening?" Yet God chose to still bless her in the midst of that negativity, that bad situation. He loves Naomi, and he provides someone to take over as the replacement son. Provides her with a baby, this one named Obed. And there's a unique bond that happens between Ruth and Naomi, now Boaz, and this baby named Obed. The reality is that some of you say, "Well, Pastor, you have no idea where I come from." You're right. Maybe I don't know where you've come from. Sometimes our natural roots, the parents and grandparents we come from, it's like you have no idea what baggage that brings. You're right. We all have baggage, don't we? There's good parts of our baggage and parts that are bad to our baggage. It's a matter of how we choose to deal with the outcome of that baggage. I think of individuals who said, you know what, if I had gone down the same path that my father led me down, I would be a spitting image of that person. But when I looked at that person and said, you know what, I do not want to be like him. And you start strategically changing how you're going to create an outcome that looks different. The reality is this: you do not have to reflect your parents. You can choose not to reflect your parents or your grandparents if it's negative. Take what's good and figure out how to redirect your course so that you can create a new reality. We do have choices to make, and those choices are important in terms of what the outcome is going to be. But we all have roots. You have roots, I have roots. Naomi's case, she had roots, and she thought, at this point, there's no hope. But God blessed her, and she had a grandson named Obed. He became the father of Jesse, he became the father of David. One of the cool things about grandchildren is this: they bring renewal. I ran into one of the grandparents that's here today, and she was sharing with me that she feels like she has more vitality and energy now than she did when she was a parent. And I thought that was interesting. I was thinking about this today, and I thought to myself, wow, you have more energy. You're twice the age that you were when you had the kids. And now you say, I have more vitality. I think the reality is this: you don't have to be with them 24/7. That's the reality. But you love them. Oh, you love them. And you love them to come to your house, and you love them to spend time with them, right? And all of a sudden, when those grandkids show up, or you go and visit them, there's that sense of, oh, I'm so glad. The joke in our family is that when we show up at Mom and Papa's house, all she wants to do is see the grandbabies. Sorry, Ma'am, I'm picking on you here, but you'll be like, oh, the babies. 20 minutes later, oh, hi, Amber. Hi, Danny. She doesn't even know we exist for about 20 minutes. It's not a bad thing. Not a bad thing. But we get excited. They get excited when they know we're coming. They get excited. They go, God, my special food. Any grandparents do that? Okay? And based on some of the things I've heard from the grandchildren, some of you go out and buy special food for them. I think you enjoy giving them all kinds of sweets and sugar and junk food and whatever, and you send them home. I mean, quit giving them Mountain Dew, people. I think sometimes we can look back, and I'm just a parent in the middle of the journey. So this is just an observation or perception. I could be wrong on this. So if I'm wrong, I'm just qualifying it up front. But I think sometimes we get clarity of what was important and what was not important as a parent. Sometimes we say, this is really important. And you get to be a grandparent, you're like, you know what? I thought it was really important that they do this, this, and this. You start to let some things slide, don't you? Because you're more about the relationship than about the discipline always. I'm not saying you don't discipline, because I know sometimes your kids need discipline. I wasn't going to tell you this, but it just hit me. One of my fondest memories of my grandparents, Grandma and Grandpa Sunshine. Now, I'm going to tell my brother here. My brother was in trouble. And my grandfather, who was, he would have been at least 83 at this point. Chasing my brother, who was running underneath the table to get away from my grandfather who wants to spank him. There is a wonderful, that is a moment I will never forget. I'm just glad it wasn't me. Just remember, when you get in trouble at grandma's house, you get in trouble at home, and it's like doubly worse, right? But as you become a grandparent, your priorities change. Your priorities change. Making time with your grandkids is important. Even if you live miles and miles away, maybe you find ways to connect with them. Maybe it's via the phone. Maybe it's through a letter. You know, we have cool technology today, Skype and FaceTime. I know Linda, she FaceTimes with Emmy all the way in Oman. So there's all kinds of ways that you can connect with them. I know grandparents that travel great distances just to spend time with their grandkids. I know some of you are here today because you said, it's Grandparents' Day, I'm going to be at church with my grandkids. And I want to just tell you, thanks for being here today. I know that your grandkids appreciate you being here. But as I already said, your legacy begins before you're a grandparent. You start making choices right in the present that will determine what you might look like as a grandparent, as a great-grandparent. It's about choosing the good and weeding out the bad, learning from repeated mistakes and learning how to fix them. And I know that's easier said than done. Faithfulness is not automatically handed down. Faithfulness is not automatically handed down. As much as we'd like to think that was the way that it works, it's something that has to be taught, and sometimes faithfulness is caught. And that's really cool when it's caught, because that means that you're modeling something that your kids and grandkids say, you know what, that's important, that's how I want to live. It's our choice. It's what we choose to pass down to the next generation. Our faithful choices will determine how willing the next generation will embrace faithfulness. So what's the big deal to this? I want to give you just one little phrase. Our legacy is reflected in our faithfulness. You want to make a difference? Be faithful. Be faithful now. If you continually fulfill faithfulness, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, it'll work out. It'll be modeled further down the road. But your legacy begins now, wherever you are, and it's reflected in how you live out your life in a way that's faithful to God. I trust that you want to choose faithfulness today. To be a person of faith, to be a person who loves God more than yourself, and wants to do everything you can to fulfill what God wants for you.